Luke Carter thought he'd found salvation in a mail-order bride, a quiet woman to tame the chaos of frontier life. What stepped off that train in 1883 Texas was anything but quiet. Clara Hastings had fire in her green eyes and steel in her spine, and within 24 hours of their wedding, she challenged everything he believed about women, marriage, and the untamed West itself. This is the story of how a cowboy's dream of peace became a wildfire of passion, survival, and revolution. Stay with me till the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this wild tale travels across the world. The dust hung thick over Clearwater Station that August afternoon, coating everything in a film of Texas grit. Luke Carter stood on the weathered wooden platform, his hat in his calloused hands, watching the eastern horizon where the railroad tracks disappeared into shimmering heat waves. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck, soaking into the collar of his only good shirt, the one he'd saved for this moment, for meeting the woman who was supposed to change his life. He was 32 years old and tired to his bones, tired of eating beans from a can, tired of talking only to cattle and his aging ranch hand, tired of lying alone in a bed too big for one man. The ranch consumed him. 1,500 acres of stubborn Texas prairie that demanded blood and sweat just to yield enough to survive. He'd built it with his own hands after the war, carved a life from nothing, but lately the silence had started to feel less like peace and more like a slow burial. That's when he'd written the letter. The advertisement had been simple, almost embarrassingly so. Rancher seeking wife. Must be of good character, willing to work, comfortable with solitude. Simple life offered in exchange for companionship and help managing household. He'd read it over a dozen times before sealing the envelope, feeling foolish and desperate in equal measure. 3 women had responded. The first wanted to know about inheritance and property deeds before she'd even asked his name. The second wrote in such flowery, affected prose that he could barely understand her meaning. But the third, Clara Hastings of Philadelphia, had written in clean, direct sentences that reminded him of creek water running over stones. She was 26, unmarried, educated, but practical, and she'd been honest about her circumstances. Her father had died, leaving debts. Her options were limited. She was willing to try frontier life if he was willing to give her a chance. They'd exchanged 4 more letters over 3 months. In each one, she'd seemed more real to him. A woman who asked practical questions about the ranch, the weather, the nearest town. She'd sent a photograph. A serious-faced young woman in a high-collared dress, hair pulled back severely, eyes looking somewhere past the camera. She looked proper. She looked quiet. She looked perfect. The train whistle cut through his thoughts, sharp and insistent. Luke's heart kicked against his ribs as the locomotive came into view, black smoke pouring from its stack, wheels screaming against the rails as it began to slow. The few other people on the platform, old Tom Henderson waiting for a parts shipment, the widow Morrison meeting her sister, turned to watch. Luke repositioned his hat, suddenly aware of how he must look. 6 feet of rangy muscle, face weathered by sun and wind, hands scarred from rope and leather. He'd shaved that morning, cut himself twice in his nervousness, and now he probably looked like he'd been in a bar fight. Not exactly the refined gentleman a Philadelphia woman might be hoping for. The train shuddered to a halt, brakes hissing steam into the hot air. Doors opened. A businessman in a suit stepped down first, then a family with 2 small children. Luke's eyes scanned each passenger, his chest tightening with each face that wasn't hers. And then she appeared. For a moment, Luke's mind went completely blank. This couldn't be her. This couldn't be the serious, proper woman from the photograph. But as she descended the steps, one gloved hand on the railing, he saw the same face, only alive now, flushed with heat and journey. Those eyes he'd thought brown in the photograph revealing themselves to be a startling shade of green, bright and sharp as new grass. She wore a traveling dress of deep blue, the bustle and fitted jacket marking her as city-bred, but something about the way she moved was all wrong for a proper lady. She didn't step down timidly or wait for assistance. She descended with purpose, carpet bag in one hand, and the moment her boots hit the platform, her head came up, and her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made him forget to breathe. Luke made himself walk forward, his legs suddenly uncertain. "Miss Hastings?" "Mr. Carter." It wasn't a question. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, with a slight rasp that suggested either the long journey or something fundamental in her nature. She didn't curtsy or lower her eyes. She looked at him the way a buyer looks at a horse, assessing, calculating, deciding. "Welcome to Clearwater." The words came out rougher than he intended. Up close, he could see the dust on her dress, the tendrils of dark hair that had escaped her bonnet, the slight pallor beneath her tan. Tan. What Philadelphia lady had a tan? "It's hot," she said simply. "Yes, ma'am. It's Texas." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something. "I can see why you need the help." He blinked, unsure if she was making a joke. "Your trunk?" "2 trunks. Brown leather. They should be in the cargo car." "I'll fetch them. The wagon's just over there. We can get you settled, and then tomorrow well, the preacher's expecting us at 6. "Tomorrow?" Those green eyes narrowed. "Why not today?" Luke felt heat that had nothing to do with the sun crawl up his neck. "I thought, after your journey, you might want to rest. Get your bearings." Clara set down her carpet bag and pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time, her gaze never leaving his face. "Mr. Carter, I've spent 4 days on trains and coaches getting here. I've been groped by drunks, propositioned by conductors, and nearly robbed twice. I didn't travel 1,000 miles to get my bearings. If you're having second thoughts, tell me now, so I can get back on that train." The platform had gone quiet. Luke was aware of Tom Henderson and the widow Morrison watching with undisguised interest. His face burned. "No second thoughts, ma'am. I just wanted to be respectful." "Respectful is fine. Hesitant is not." She picked up her bag again. "Can we marry today?" "The preacher's not available till tomorrow evening." "Then tomorrow evening it is. Now, are you going to show me this ranch of yours, or do I stand here until sundown?" Luke found himself fighting a smile despite his confusion. "Yes, ma'am. This way." He retrieved her trunks, heavy enough to make him wonder what she'd packed, and loaded them into his wagon. Clara climbed up to the bench seat without waiting for help, arranging her skirts with brisk efficiency. When he settled beside her and took up the reins, she was already looking out at the town, taking in Clearwater's single street with its handful of buildings, the saloon, the general store, the church. "Small," she observed. "Yes, ma'am." "How far to your ranch?" 8 miles west." "Who are your neighbors?" "Closest is the Diamond T, about 4 miles north. Jack Thompson's place." "Good man. Then there's the Henderson Ranch to the east, couple smaller homesteads south. Mostly it's open range out there." Clara nodded, still looking around with those sharp eyes. A rider passed them, tipping his hat. She nodded back without any of the coy modesty Luke had expected. When they passed the saloon, where several ranch hands lounged on the porch with bottles, she didn't avert her gaze or blush. She just looked at them the way she looked at everything, directly, assessingly. "You drink?" she asked suddenly. Luke nearly dropped the reins. "Excuse me? Do you drink?" "Whiskey, beer, whatever they serve in that establishment." "Sometimes, not often. Why?" "Because I need to know if you're the kind of man who will waste money and come home mean." Her bluntness left him speechless for a moment. "I'm not mean, Miss Hastings, and I don't waste money." "Good." She adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "I won't tolerate a drunk or a bully. I should have asked that in the letters, but it seemed indelicate." "And asking now isn't?" She turned to look at him, and for the first time he saw something that might have been amusement in her expression. "Mr. Carter, we're about to get married and spend our lives together. I think we're past indelicate." Luke didn't know what to say to that, so he concentrated on driving. The wagon rattled out of town, onto the rutted dirt road that led west into open country. The prairie stretched out around them, rolling and brown in the late summer heat, dotted with mesquite and stunted oaks. In the distance, his cattle grazed in scattered groups, dark shapes against the pale grass. Clara didn't ask questions now. She just looked, her eyes moving constantly, reading the landscape. Luke watched her from the corner of his eye, this strange woman who wasn't at all what he'd expected, and felt something like panic beginning to stir in his chest. What had he done? Who was this person he was about to bind himself to? After 20 minutes of silence, Clara spoke. Your letter said you had 1,500 acres. Yes, ma'am. How many head of cattle? About 400 right now. Had more, but the drought took some. Horses? 12. 6 working, 6 for breeding. Crops? Garden for the house. No time for more. Help? One hand, Santiago. He's been with me since I bought the place. Clara nodded slowly, and he could almost see her mind working, calculating. Your house? Is it finished? It's functional. That's not the same thing. No, ma'am, it's not. The ranch came into view as they crested a low rise. Luke tried to see it through her eyes and felt his stomach sink. The house was a simple wooden structure, 2 rooms with a loft, unpainted boards weathered to gray. The barn was larger and in better repair. He'd prioritized shelter for his stock over comfort for himself. There was a chicken coop, a well with a pump, a corral, and several small outbuildings. It was a working ranch, spare and functional, without a single unnecessary thing. Clara said nothing as they approached. Luke pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, his mouth dry. This was it. The moment she would realize what she'd agreed to, what kind of life she'd signed up for. He waited for tears, for recriminations, for demands to be taken back to the station. Instead, she climbed down from the wagon, brushed dust from her skirts, and walked up to the house. She tried the door, unlocked, and went inside without asking permission. Luke followed, his heart hammering. Inside, the house showed all his deficiencies as a homemaker. The main room held a table he'd built himself, chairs that didn't match, a stove that worked but wasn't pretty, shelves lined with canned goods and basic supplies. Everything was clean. He'd scrubbed the place top to bottom the night before, but it was stark, masculine, empty of anything soft or decorative. Clara walked through slowly, touching the table, opening the stove door, examining the pump over the sink. She peered into the second room, his bedroom, with its simple bed and trunk, then climbed the ladder to look at the loft. When she came back down, her expression was unreadable. This is it? Yes, ma'am. Luke cleared his throat. I know it's not what you're used to. No, it's not. She set her carpet bag on the table. But it's clean. That's something. I can build on, add rooms, make it better. Clara turned to face him, and in the dimmer light of the house, her eyes seemed even greener, almost luminous. Mr. Carter, I'm not here for fancy rooms or fine furniture. I'm here because my alternatives were worse, but I won't lie and say this doesn't scare me. Her honesty disarmed him completely. It scares me too, he admitted. Does it? She studied his face. You seem like a man who knows what he wants. I thought I did. I wanted quiet, peace, someone to make this place feel like a home instead of just a camp. And now? Now I'm not sure what I'm getting. Something flashed in her expression, anger maybe, or hurt. You're getting exactly what I told you in my letters. A woman who'll work, who'll be faithful, who'll try to make this arrangement work. What did you expect? Luke ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. Someone more conventional, I guess. Conventional. Claire's laugh was sharp. Mr. Carter, conventional women don't answer advertisements for mail-order brides. Conventional women have families and prospects and choices. I have none of those things. What I have is a willingness to work and a determination not to be a burden. If that's not conventional enough for you, I can leave in the morning. I don't want you to leave. The words came out before he'd thought them through, but they were true. Despite his confusion, despite the way she'd upended every expectation, he didn't want her to leave. There was something about her, a strength, a vitality, that made the house feel less empty already. Claire's expression softened slightly. Then let's be clear with each other. I'm not the quiet, simple woman you probably imagined. I ask questions, I have opinions. I don't believe in pretending to be helpless when I'm not. If you want someone who'll just smile and defer to you in everything, I'm not that person. What are you then? She considered the question. I'm someone who reads, who thinks, who learned to shoot because my father believed women should be able to protect themselves, who helped run his shipping office until he died because he had no sons. I'm someone who's willing to learn ranch life, but not willing to pretend I'm something I'm not. Luke stared at her, trying to reconcile this declaration with the woman in the photograph, with the simple letters she'd written. You didn't mention any of that. Would you have wanted me if I had? The question hung in the air between them. Luke thought about it honestly. 3 months ago, if a woman had written telling him she could shoot and had run a business, would he have chosen her, or would he have moved on to someone who seemed easier, more manageable? I don't know, he said finally, but you're here now. Yes, I am. They stood looking at each other in the dusty afternoon light, two strangers who'd agreed to bind their lives together based on letters and hope and desperation. Luke felt the weight of tomorrow evening's ceremony settling on his shoulders. This was real, this was happening, and this woman, this fierce, complicated, unexpected woman, was going to be his wife. I should show you around, he said, breaking the silence. Let you get settled. Yes? Clara untied her bonnet and set it on the table. Her dark hair was pinned up elaborately, city style. And then perhaps you can tell me what you actually do around here, so I can figure out how to help. You just got here. You should rest. Mr. Carter. She fixed him with that green stare. We've established that I'm not conventional. Rest can wait. Understanding what I'm getting into cannot. So Luke showed her. He showed her the barn where Santiago was mending tack, introduced her to his weathered ranch hand who looked at Clara with barely concealed surprise. He showed her the horses, the cattle scattered across the near pastures, the water sources, the property lines. Clara asked questions constantly, intelligent questions that showed she was trying to understand not just what things were, but how they worked together, what the rhythms of ranch life would be. By the time the sun started sinking toward the horizon, they'd walked miles. Clara's face was flushed with heat, her dress dusty, but she hadn't complained once. She'd even climbed through a fence to get a closer look at his breeding horses, hiking her skirts up without embarrassment when they caught on the wire. You'll need to get different clothes, Luke said as they walked back toward the house. Dresses like that won't work for ranch life. I have some simpler things in my trunk, and I can sew. There's a seamstress in town, Mrs. Chen. She can help with what you need. Clara nodded, but her attention had shifted to something else. That's Santiago's cabin? She pointed to a small structure beyond the barn. Yes. And he cooks for himself? We all do. Sometimes we eat together, but mostly everyone fends for themselves. That's inefficient, Clara frowned. If I'm cooking anyway, I might as well cook for 3. Save time and resources. Luke hadn't thought of it that way. Santiago might appreciate that. We'll ask him. Clara stopped walking and turned to face the house, the outbuildings, the vast stretch of land beyond. The evening light turned everything gold and amber. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Harsh, but beautiful. I can see why you love it. Something in Luke's chest loosened at those words. You think you could love it too? I think I could try. She looked at him, her expression more open than it had been all day. I think I want to try. They stood there as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Luke wanted to say something meaningful, something that would bridge the strange gap between them, but words failed him. So instead, he just stood beside her, this woman who was about to become his wife, and watched the day end. Santiago called them for supper, beans and salt pork and cornbread he'd made in his cabin. They ate together in the barn, sitting on hay bales. Clara perched primly despite the informal setting. The ranch hand asked her polite questions in his accented English. How was her journey? Did she like Texas? What did she think of the ranch? And Clara answered honestly, without false enthusiasm, but without complaint either. Tomorrow we marry, Santiago said, raising his tin cup of water in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, Luke echoed, meeting Clara's eyes across the dim space. To not making a terrible mistake, Clara said dryly, and both men laughed despite themselves. As darkness fell, Luke brought Clara's trunks into the house and set them in the bedroom. You can sleep here tonight. I'll take the loft. Clara raised an eyebrow. We're getting married tomorrow. Isn't that a bit proper? Luke supplied. I was going to say pointless, but yes. It's one night, Miss Hastings. Seems right to do it this way. She didn't argue, but the look she gave him suggested she thought he was being ridiculous. As you wish, Mr. Carter. Luke climbed to the loft, his usual sleeping place before he'd prepared the bedroom for her. He could hear her moving around below, the rustle of fabric as she undressed, the creak of the bed frame as she lay down. He stared at the rough wooden ceiling, his mind racing. Tomorrow, he would marry this woman. Tomorrow, she would become Clara Carter, his wife, his partner, his responsibility. Tomorrow, everything would change. He'd wanted change, had asked for it, but now that it was here, he felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to see the bottom. Below, Clara's voice drifted up, quiet in the darkness. Mr. Carter? Yes? Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for taking it. Silence fell again, but it felt different now, less awkward, more companionable. Luke closed his eyes and tried to sleep, tried not to think about green eyes and unexpected strength and all the ways his carefully planned life was about to be upended. He'd wanted a quiet wife. Instead, he was getting Clara Hastings. Only time would tell if that was salvation or disaster. The next day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Clara spent the morning unpacking her trunks, filling the empty house with her belongings. Books, a surprising number of them, clothes both fancy and practical, a framed photograph of a stern-looking man who must have been her father, and a small pistol that made Luke do a double-take. You said you could shoot, he said, staring at the weapon. I did. Clara checked the pistol's action with practiced ease before placing it in the drawer of the bedside table. My father insisted. Is that a problem? No, just unexpected. You should expect the unexpected where I'm concerned, Mr. Carter. By evening, they were both dressed in their best clothes, Clara in a simple gray dress with white trim, Luke in his wedding suit that had last seen use at a neighbor's funeral. Santiago drove them into town in the wagon, acting as witness along with Mrs. Morrison, who'd agreed to stand in at the ceremony. The church was small and plain, smelling of candle wax and old wood. Reverend Matthews, a kindly man with white hair and tired eyes, stood before them with his Bible. There were no flowers, no music, no guests beyond Santiago and the widow. It was a practical ceremony for a practical union. Dearly beloved, the Reverend began, and Luke felt his heart start to race. He barely heard the words. He was too aware of Clara standing beside him, straight-backed and calm, her hand cold when he took it for the vows. Her voice was steady as she spoke her part, no tremor or hesitation. When Luke said his own vows, his voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Matthews said finally, closing his Bible. Luke turned to Clara, this stranger who was now his wife, and saw something flicker in her eyes. Nervousness, finally, the first real crack in her composed exterior. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and pressed his lips to hers. It was meant to be a simple kiss, brief and chaste. But the moment their lips met, something electric passed between them. Clara's breath caught, and her hand came up to grip his arm. The kiss deepened, just for a moment, just enough for Luke to taste the sweetness of her mouth and feel the surprising heat of her response. They broke apart, both breathing harder than they should be. Mrs. Morrison was smiling. Santiago grinned. The Reverend cleared his throat diplomatically. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They signed the register in silence, both too aware of what came next. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than the journey in. Clara sat close to Luke on the wagon bench, her shoulder touching his, and neither of them pulled away. The sun was setting again, the same golden light as the night before, but everything had changed. At the ranch, Santiago excused himself quickly, retreating to his cabin with obvious tact. Luke helped Clara down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. She looked up at him, those green eyes dark in the fading light. Well, she said softly, here we are. Here we are, Luke echoed. They went into the house together. Luke lit a lamp while Clara stood by the table, suddenly uncertain. The confidence she'd shown since arriving seemed to have deserted her, leaving behind a young woman facing her wedding night with a man she barely knew. Clara, Luke said gently, and she looked at him. We don't have to... if you're not ready, we can wait. Pride flashed in her expression. I'm not some frightened virgin who doesn't know what happens between a man and his wife. I didn't say you were. Then why are you hesitating? Because I want this to be good for you, not just something you endure. Clara's expression softened. She crossed the room to stand in front of him, close enough that he could smell the lavender she'd tucked into her hair. Mr. Carter, Luke, you can call me Luke now. Luke. She said his name like she was tasting it. I didn't come here expecting romance. I came expecting partnership, work, survival. Anything more than that is... what? Unexpected. She smiled slightly, but not unwelcome. Luke reached up to cup her face, his callous thumb brushing her cheek. You're full of surprises, Clara Carter. So are you, she whispered, and then she was kissing him, fierce and hungry, all her composure finally breaking. Luke responded in kind, pulling her against him, feeling the curves of her body through the layers of fabric. She made a sound low in her throat and her fingers dug into his shoulders. The kiss was nothing like the chaste brush of lips in the church. This was raw need, two people who'd been alone too long finally allowing themselves to want. They stumbled toward the bedroom, mouths still locked together, hands fumbling with buttons and laces. Clara's dress fell away to reveal a simple chemise. Luke's shirt joined it on the floor. In the lamplight, her skin glowed pale and smooth, her dark hair tumbling down as she pulled out the pins. You're beautiful, Luke breathed, and Clara laughed. You don't have to say that. I'm saying it because it's true. She pulled him down onto the bed, and Luke went willingly, covering her body with his own. She was softer than he'd expected, warmer, more responsive. When he touched her, she gasped and arched into him. When she touched him back, her hands sure and curious, he groaned like a man dying. They came together in a rush of heat and need, bodies finding their rhythm despite their newness to each other. Clara cried out, her nails raking down his back, and Luke buried his face in her neck, breathing her in as pleasure crashed over them both. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweating and breathless. Clara's head rested on Luke's chest, his arm wrapped around her. The lamp still burned on the dresser, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Well, Clara said finally, her voice lazy and satisfied, that was definitely unexpected. Luke laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Good unexpected? Very good unexpected. She traced patterns on his skin with one finger. I thought it would be more clinical, more of a duty. Did it feel like a duty? No? She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her hair a wild dark curtain around her face. It felt like freedom. Luke didn't understand what she meant, but he could see the truth of it in her eyes. He pulled her back down against him, kissing her forehead. Get some sleep, wife. Not yet, Clara murmured, and her hand began to wander south, reigniting the fire between them. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies with more attention. Clara was bold in her curiosity, unashamed of her pleasure or her desires. Luke matched her, determined to show her that this marriage would be about more than just work and survival. When they finally slept, it was near dawn, wrapped around each other in the narrow bed. The house that had felt so empty yesterday now felt full of possibility, full of warmth, full of a wild energy that Luke couldn't quite name but knew he never wanted to lose. Outside, the Texas prairie waited for the sun, patient and eternal. A quiet life had been the dream. But as Luke drifted off to sleep, Clara's heartbeat steady against his chest, he realized that quiet was the last thing he wanted anymore. What he'd gotten was wild. What he'd gotten was Clara. And God help him, he didn't want to give it back. The first rays of morning sun spilled through the bedroom window, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Luke woke slowly, awareness returning in layers, the warmth of another body pressed against his, the unfamiliar weight of an arm across his chest, the scent of lavender and woman filling his senses. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, he couldn't quite remember why everything felt different. Then Clara stirred beside him, and memory crashed back like a wave. His wife. This was his wife. Luke turned his head to look at her. In sleep, Clara's face had lost all its sharp edges, all that fierce determination that seemed to drive her every waking moment. Her dark hair spread across the pillow in tangles, her lips slightly parted, one hand curled against his ribs. She looked younger like this, vulnerable in a way she'd never allow herself to be when conscious. He'd married this woman yesterday, made love to her, twice, with an intensity that still made his pulse quicken to remember. And now the real work began. Now they had to figure out how to actually live together, how to turn a legal contract and physical passion into something that resembled a partnership. As if sensing his thoughts, Clara's eyes fluttered open. For a second, she looked confused, disoriented. Then awareness flooded her expression, and he watched her remember everything just as he had. Her cheeks flushed pink. "Morning," Luke said softly. "Morning." Clara's voice came out husky, rougher than usual. She started to pull away, suddenly modest, but Luke tightened his arm around her. "Don't. Not yet." She relaxed slightly, though tension still hummed through her body. "I should get up. There's work to do." "The work will wait." "Will it?" Clara looked at him, and he could see her mind already racing ahead, cataloging tasks and responsibilities. "You said you usually start early. I don't want to be a hindrance." "You're not a hindrance, you're my wife, and it's your first morning here. Give yourself a moment to breathe." Clara studied his face as if searching for mockery or impatience. Finding neither, she let out a long breath and settled back against him. "I'm not good at this," she admitted quietly. "At what?" "At being still. At just being. My father always said idle hands were the devil's workshop. There was always something to do, always something that needed attention." Luke stroked her hair, feeling the silky strands slide through his fingers. "This isn't idle. This is us learning each other. That's important work, too." "Is it?" But she sounded uncertain rather than argumentative. "It is." He kissed her forehead. "Tell me something about yourself I don't know, something you didn't put in the letters." Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid. All the time. Of failing, of being sent back, of not being enough. I'm afraid that one day you'll regret choosing me, that you'll wish you'd picked one of the other women who wrote to you." The rawness of the confession caught Luke off guard. He'd seen nothing but confidence from Clara since she'd stepped off that train, nothing but determination and strength. To hear her admit to fear, to constant gnawing fear, made something in his chest ache. "I'm afraid too," he said. "Afraid I won't be a good husband. Afraid I'll disappoint you, that ranch life will break you, that you'll wake up one day and hate me for bringing you here." Clara turned in his arms to look at him directly. "Then we're both fools." "Probably. But we're married fools now, so we might as well make the best of it." Luke couldn't help but smile. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." "I'm not a romantic, Luke Carter. I'm a realist." "I'm starting to see that." He traced the line of her jaw with one finger, but last night wasn't very realistic. Color flooded her cheeks again, but she held his gaze. "Last night was necessary. We're married. That's part of marriage." "Is that what you tell yourself, that it was necessary?" "Wasn't it?" Luke leaned down and kissed her, slow and deep, until she was breathless and clinging to him. When he pulled back, her eyes were dark with desire. "Did that feel necessary, Clara, or did it feel like something more?" "Both," she whispered, and kissed him again. They made love in the morning light, slower and more tender than the urgent coupling of their wedding night. Afterward, Clara finally insisted on getting up, and Luke reluctantly let her go. He watched as she moved around the bedroom, unself-conscious in her nakedness, retrieving clothes from her trunk. "I'll need to reorganize things," she said, more to herself than to him. "Find places for everything. We can't live out of trunks." "I can build more shelves. A wardrobe if you need it." "Can you?" She glanced at him with interest. "You're a carpenter too?" "Rancher, carpenter, blacksmith when I have to be. You learn to do everything out here. No point in riding 8 miles to town every time you need something fixed." Clara nodded slowly, that calculating look back in her eyes. "Then I'll need to learn too, all of it. I won't be helpless." "I never thought you would be." By the time they emerged from the bedroom, dressed and somewhat composed, Santiago was already at work in the barn. Luke could hear him whistling, a cheerful Spanish tune that echoed across the yard. Clara moved to the kitchen area, examining the supplies with a critical eye. You have flour, salt, beans, coffee, she murmured, opening tins and jars. Bacon, some dried beef, not much else. There's eggs from the chickens. Sometimes we shoot rabbits or deer. The garden's mostly dead from the drought, but there's some vegetables left. We'll need more supplies, proper supplies. Sugar, butter, milk. Do you have a cow? No, the nearest dairy is at the Henderson place. Then we should get a cow. Buying milk is wasteful when we have the land to support one. Luke leaned against the doorframe, watching her take stock of his meager provisions. You sound like you've done this before. I ran a household after my mother died. I was 15. My father worked long hours, so everything else fell to me. Cooking, cleaning, managing the accounts. She turned to face him. I'm not afraid of hard work, Luke. I'm only afraid of not knowing what the work is. Then I'll teach you. Everything I know about ranching, I'll teach you. Something in Clara's expression shifted. Gratitude, maybe, or relief. And I'll teach you how to eat better than beans and bacon. She proved as good as her word. Using the limited supplies available, Clara managed to produce a breakfast that put Luke's usual fare to shame. Eggs scrambled with bits of bacon and wild onions she found near the creek. Biscuits that were actually fluffy rather than hard as rocks. Coffee that didn't taste like mud. Santiago joined them, his eyes widening at the spread. Senora, he said reverently, this is a miracle. It's basic cooking, Clara replied, but Luke could see she was pleased by the praise. After breakfast, Luke took Clara out to begin her education in ranch life. They started with the horses, Clara learning each one's name and temperament. She was nervous at first, keeping her distance from the large animals, but determination won out over fear. By the end of an hour, she was stroking the nose of Luke's bay gelding, Duke, with only a slight tremor in her hand. He likes you, Luke observed. How can you tell? He's leaning into your touch. If he didn't like you, he'd pull away. Clara smiled, small but genuine. What do I do now? Now you learn to saddle him. The process was more complicated than Clara had anticipated. Luke showed her how to approach the horse, how to place the blanket and saddle, how to tighten the cinch without making it too loose or too tight. Clara fumbled at first, her city-soft hands clumsy with the unfamiliar equipment, but she refused to give up. Sweat beaded on her forehead in the morning heat. Her dress was soon dusty, but she kept working until she'd managed to saddle Duke properly. Good, Luke said. Now, let's see you ride. Clara's nervousness returned. I've never ridden astride before. In Philadelphia, ladies ride side saddle. This isn't Philadelphia, and side saddle won't work for ranch riding. You need both legs for balance and control. Luke led Duke to the mounting block. Come on, I'll help you. Getting Clara onto the horse took several attempts. Her dress kept catching, her feet couldn't find the stirrups, and she clutched at the saddle horn like it was a lifeline. But finally she was mounted, sitting astride with her skirts hiked up to show her legs in their practical cotton stockings. This is scandalous, she muttered, but there was excitement in her voice too. This is Texas, Luke replied, swinging up onto his own horse, a rangy mare named Star. Different rules out here. They rode slowly around the corral at first, Luke teaching Clara the basics, how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse with her legs, how to move with the animal's gait rather than fighting it. Clara was stiff and awkward, bouncing in the saddle in a way that would leave her sore tomorrow, but she was trying. And gradually, as the morning wore on, she began to relax. Her death grip on the saddle horn eased, her back straightened. She even managed a small smile. I'm doing it, she said, wonder in her voice. You're doing it, Luke confirmed. They ventured out of the corral and onto the open prairie, moving at a walk. Clara's eyes were everywhere, taking in the landscape, the cattle grazing in the distance, the vast blue sky unmarred by buildings or smoke. Luke watched her fall in love with the land in real time. He could see it in the way her shoulders dropped, the way her breathing deepened, the soft smile that curved her lips. It's so big, she said quietly. So empty. Does that bother you? No. Clara turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright. It's liberating. In the city, you're always on top of people, always being watched and judged. Here you could scream and no one would hear you. Is that what you want to do? Scream? She laughed. Maybe. Sometimes. Don't you ever just want to yell into the void? More often than I'd admit. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the horses' hooves making soft sounds in the dry grass. Luke pointed out landmarks, the creek that ran through his property, mostly dry now from the drought, the stand of oaks that marked his northern boundary, the rocky outcropping where he'd once cornered a mountain lion. Clara absorbed it all, asking questions, making mental notes. When they returned to the ranch house for lunch, Clara was moving stiffly, clearly feeling the effects of her first ride. But she didn't complain. Instead, she threw herself into preparing a meal, improvising with what little they had to make something resembling stew. Santiago joined them again, and over the simple food they talked about the ranch's needs. "The drought's been hard," Santiago said, his weathered face serious. "We've lost maybe 20 head in the last 2 months. Water's getting scarce." "How deep is the well?" Clara asked. Both men looked at her in surprise. "About 40 feet, Luke said. "Why? Is it drying up?" "Not yet, but the water level's dropped." Clara frowned, her mind clearly working. In Philadelphia, when the wells got low, they'd dig deeper or find new sources. "Have you looked for other springs on your property?" "There's the creek, but it's mostly dry." "But it flows sometimes, doesn't it, when it rains?" "Yes." "Then the water's still there, underground. You just need to find where it pools." Clara looked between them. "I don't know much about ranching yet, but I know about water. My father dealt with shipping, with tides and currents. Water always finds the low places." Santiago's eyes lit up. "La señora is right. There are places on the land where the ground stays greener, where there's water underneath." Luke felt a flicker of hope. He'd been so focused on just surviving day to day that he hadn't thought strategically about water sources. "You're saying we should dig new wells." "Or at least find where the water is," Clara said. "So when you need to dig, you know where to put the effort." It was a small thing, a simple observation, but it shifted something in Luke's perception. Clara wasn't just a wife to cook and clean. She could think, plan, contribute ideas he wouldn't have considered. The partnership he'd hoped for was actually possible. The afternoon was spent with Clara learning more practical tasks. Luke showed her how to collect eggs from the chickens. She was terrified of the rooster and wouldn't go near him, which made Santiago laugh, and how to pump water from the well without straining her back. He taught her to recognize the signs of sick cattle, the difference between a horse that was tired and one that was lame, how to read the sky for coming weather. Clara absorbed it all with fierce concentration, taking mental notes, asking follow-up questions. Luke was impressed by how quickly she grasped concepts, how she connected new information to things she already knew. When he explained how to spot a cow in distress, she immediately related it to how her father had taught her to recognize when workers were trying to hide problems. "It's the same principle," she said. "You have to look for what's not right, what doesn't fit the pattern." Exactly. By evening, they were both exhausted. Clara's face was sunburned despite her bonnet, her hands blistered from unfamiliar work, her body aching from riding. But as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, she looked more satisfied than tired. "I did it," she said softly. "A whole day of ranch work." "You did," Luke agreed. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been run over by a horse." He laughed. "It gets easier." "Does it?" "Eventually." He took her hand, careful of the blisters. "You did good today, Clara. Real good." She turned to look at him, and in the golden light her eyes seemed to glow. "Thank you for being patient with me, for not making me feel stupid for not knowing things." "But you're not stupid. You're learning. There's a difference." "My father used to get so angry when I didn't understand something immediately. He'd say I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't paying attention." Clara's voice went quiet. "It made me afraid to ask questions, afraid to admit when I didn't know." Luke squeezed her hand gently. "You can always ask me questions. I won't get angry." "Promise?" "Promise." They sat in silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to emerge, more stars than Clara had ever seen in Philadelphia, where city lights washed them out. She leaned her head against Luke's shoulder, and he felt the simple rightness of the moment, this woman beside him, this land around him, this life they were beginning to build together. Inside the house later, Clara's exhaustion caught up with her. She could barely keep her eyes open as she changed into her nightgown. Luke helped her into bed, tucking the blankets around her like she was something precious. "Sleep," he murmured. "Tomorrow we'll do it all again." "Tomorrow," Clara agreed drowsily. Then, just as he was about to blow out the lamp, she spoke again. "Luke?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad it was you. That I answered your advertisement. I'm glad." Something warm and fierce bloomed in Luke's chest. "Me too, Clara. Me too." He climbed in beside her, and she immediately curled into him, seeking his warmth even in sleep. Luke lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling, his mind full of plans and possibilities. Clara had been here only 2 days, and already everything felt different. The house felt like a home. The work felt like it had purpose beyond mere survival. The future felt like something worth building. He'd wanted quiet. Instead, he'd gotten this whirlwind of a woman who asked questions and challenged assumptions and made him see his own land with fresh eyes. And somehow, improbably, it was exactly what he needed. The next morning began the pattern that would define their first weeks together. Clara woke early, determined not to be a burden, and threw herself into work with almost frightening intensity. She cooked breakfast, cleaned the house, tried to tend the dying garden, collected eggs, and insisted on learning whatever Luke would teach her. But it quickly became clear that Clara's enthusiasm outpaced her ability. On the 3rd day, she tried to help Santiago repair a fence and nearly cut her hand open on the barbed wire. On the 5th day, she attempted to rope a calf and ended up getting dragged through the dirt when the animal bolted. On the 7th day, she insisted on helping shoe one of the horses and almost got kicked in the head when she spooked the animal. Luke found himself torn between admiration for her determination and terror that she was going to seriously hurt herself. "You need to slow down," he told her after the near miss with the horse. "Learn to walk before you run." "I don't have time to go slow," Clara snapped, frustration making her sharp. "Every minute I spend being useless is a minute I'm failing." "Failing at what?" "At being the wife you need." The words hung between them, raw and painful. Luke stared at her, this proud woman with dirt on her face and defeat in her eyes, and finally understood. Clara wasn't just trying to learn ranch life, she was trying to prove her worth, to justify her existence here, to earn the right to stay. "Clara." He took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "You're not failing, you're learning. That's different." "Is it?" "Because I feel like all I do is make mistakes and slow you down." "You want to know what you've done in 1 week?" Luke counted off on his fingers. "You've cooked better meals than I've eaten in years. You've organized this house so I can actually find things. You've spotted 3 problems with the herd I would have missed. You've made Santiago smile more in 7 days than I've seen in 6 months. And you've given me a reason to come inside at night instead of just collapsing wherever I finish working." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I dropped a dozen eggs yesterday." "Eggs are cheap. You're not. I can't even ride properly yet." "You've been riding for a week. I've been riding for 25 years. "I'm so afraid," Clara whispered. "Afraid you'll realize you made a mistake. Afraid the townspeople will laugh at you for having a wife who can't do anything right. Afraid I'll disappoint you so badly you'll send me back." Luke pulled her into his arms, holding her tight despite the dust and sweat. "I'm not sending you back. You're my wife. This is your home now, for good or ill. And the only thing that would disappoint me is if you stopped trying, stopped being yourself, stopped asking questions and pushing forward." "Even when I mess up." "Especially when you mess up. That's how you learn." Clara clung to him, her face pressed against his chest, and Luke felt her slowly relax. When she pulled back, she looked more composed, more like herself. "All right," she said, "I'll try to be more patient with myself." "Good. But I'm still learning to rope. I don't care how many times I get dragged." Luke laughed despite himself. "Deal, but you're wearing thicker gloves." True to her word, Clara kept practicing. She practiced riding until her legs ached and her backside was bruised. She practiced roping until her shoulders burned and her hands bled through even the thick gloves. She practiced shooting. That pistol from her trunk turned out to be a serviceable weapon, until she could hit a target more often than not. And slowly, gradually, she improved. The catastrophic failures became mere mistakes. The mistakes became occasional slips. The slips became rare. Clara's soft city hands grew calloused, her pale skin tanned and freckled. Her awkward movements became more confident, more sure. But it was the small moments that showed Luke who his wife truly was. Like the morning he found her in the barn before dawn, sitting on a hay bale with a book propped on her knees, reading by lantern light. Or the afternoon he discovered her talking to the chickens as she collected eggs, having full conversations as if they might answer back. Or the evening he came in from a long day to find her attempting to sew a tear in his shirt, cursing creatively when the needle pricked her finger. 2 weeks after their wedding, they made their first trip to town together. Clara needed fabric for new clothes. Her city dresses were already showing wear, and Luke needed supplies. The ride in the wagon gave them time to talk, something they'd been too busy for lately. "Are you prepared for this?" Luke asked as they approached Clearwater. "For what?" "For the town. For people." Clara gave him a puzzled look. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because small-town folk can be, curious and judgmental, especially about newcomers. I lived in a city of 500,000 people. I think I can handle a town of maybe 300. Luke wasn't so sure, but he didn't push it. As they rolled down Clearwater's main street, he saw curtains twitching in windows, people stopping on the boardwalk to stare. News of his marriage had obviously spread, and everyone wanted a look at the new Mrs. Carter. Their first stop was the general store. Josiah Miller, the proprietor, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. "Luke, and this must be your new bride. Ma'am, welcome to Clearwater." "Thank you," Clara said politely. "I'm Clara Carter. You're from back east, I hear." "Philadelphia. Long way from home." "This is home now." Josiah beamed, clearly charmed. As Luke gathered supplies, Clara examined the fabric selection with Mrs. Chen, the seamstress, who'd come in for the introduction. The older Chinese woman looked Clara up and down with a critical eye. "You need work clothes," she said bluntly. "Not these." She gestured at Clara's dress dismissively. "Yes, I do. Can you help?" "I can. You come to my shop tomorrow. I measure you, make you proper ranch clothes. Split skirts, sturdy blouses. Nothing fancy." "That sounds perfect." As they discussed fabrics and cuts, Luke wandered the store, listening to the conversation around him. The other customers, ranchers' wives mostly, were whispering about Clara, their voices just loud enough to carry. "Awfully bold, isn't she?" "Did you see how she shook Mr. Miller's hand? Like a man." "I heard she can shoot." "A woman with a gun. Unnatural." Luke felt his jaw tighten. Clara seemed oblivious, focused on her conversation with Mrs. Chen, but he knew she had to hear the whispers. He was about to say something when Clara turned and addressed the room at large. "Ladies, if you have questions about me, you're welcome to ask directly. I'm happy to answer." The store went silent. The whispering women looked at each other, clearly not expecting to be called out. Finally, one of them, Martha Henderson, wife of Luke's neighbor, stepped forward. "We're just curious, Mrs. Carter. It's not often we get new folks in town." "I understand. What would you like to know?" "Well, is it true you can shoot?" "Yes, my father taught me. He believed women should be able to protect themselves." "And you really work on the ranch? Like a man?" Clara's expression hardened slightly. "I work on the ranch because it's my home and I want to contribute. I don't think that makes me like a man. It makes me like a partner." "But surely Mr. Carter doesn't expect you to do men's work." "Mr. Carter expects me to do whatever I'm capable of doing, and I expect the same of myself." The women exchanged glances, clearly not sure what to make of this answer. Martha Henderson studied Clara with new interest. "You're not what we expected." "I rarely am," Clara replied dryly. To Luke's surprise, Martha laughed. "I think I like you, Mrs. Carter. You should come to the ladies' auxiliary meeting next month. We could use some fresh perspective." "I'd be happy to. Though I should warn you, I have no experience with church socials or quilting bees. Neither do half of us. Mostly we just drink tea and complain about our husbands." "Then I should fit right in." The tension in the store broke. The women began to relax, to approach Clara with actual questions rather than judgment. Luke watched his wife handle them all with a mixture of grace and bluntness that seemed to win people over despite themselves. By the time they left the store, Clara had made more allies than enemies. "That went well," Luke said as they loaded the wagon. "Did it? I felt like I was on trial." "You were. And you passed." Clara shook her head. "I don't understand these people. In Philadelphia, no one cared what you did as long as you paid your bills and didn't cause trouble. Here, everyone seems to care about everything. It's different when you live this spread out. Your neighbors might be the only people you see for weeks. Their opinion matters more. Even when they're wrong? Especially then." They stopped at Mrs. Chen's shop for Clara's measurements, then at the blacksmith's where Luke needed some tools repaired. At each stop, more people approached to meet Clara, to assess her, to form their opinions. Clara handled it all with the same direct manner that seemed to either charm or offend people, with no middle ground. It was at the saloon, where Luke stopped to pay off a small debt, that they ran into trouble. 3 cowboys lounged on the porch, bottles in hand, clearly already drunk despite the early hour. They looked up as Luke and Clara approached, their eyes fixing on her with unmistakable interest. "Well, well," one of them drawled. "You must be Carter's mail-order bride." Clara stiffened but didn't respond. Luke moved slightly in front of her. "Afternoon, boys." "She's prettier than I expected," another cowboy said, ignoring Luke entirely. "Course, she's got that hard look about her. Bet she's a wildcat in bed." Luke's hand went to Clara's arm, both to steady her and to keep himself from launching at the man. "Watch your mouth, or what?" The first cowboy stood, swaying slightly. "You gonna fight all of us, Carter?" "If I have to." The cowboy laughed. "All this over a bought woman. Hell, pass her around when you're done, will you?" Luke was moving before he'd consciously decided to, his fist connecting with the man's jaw with satisfying force. The cowboy went down hard. His friend surged forward, and suddenly Luke was fighting both of them, fists flying, blood starting to flow. And then Clara was there. She didn't scream or faint or run for help. Instead, she pulled that pistol from her bag and fired it straight up into the air. The shot echoed like thunder, freezing everyone in place. "That's enough," Clara said calmly, the gun now pointed at the cowboys. "You insulted me. My husband defended me. Now we're leaving, and you're going to stay right here and think about your manners." The cowboys stared at her, too shocked to move. Luke was breathing hard, his knuckles bleeding, adrenaline singing through his veins. Clara grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the wagon. "Come on, Luke, let's go home." They were halfway back to the ranch before either of them spoke. Luke's hands were still shaking, his jaw clenched tight. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For what?" "For losing my temper, for fighting, for putting you in that position." Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Do you know what the worst part of that was? Not the insults, not even the implication. The worst part was knowing that's how some men will always see me, as something bought, something owned, something to be used and discarded. You're not any of those things. I know that, and you know that, but they don't, and there will be others who think the same way." She turned to look at him, her eyes fierce. "So I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't fight my battles for me. Not unless I ask. I have to learn to stand up for myself out here, to make people respect me on my own terms. If you always defend me, they'll never see me as anything but your possession." Luke understood what she was asking, even as everything in him rebelled against it. "What if I can't watch someone disrespect you? Then look away until I handle it." "Clara, see, please, Luke, I need this. I need to prove I can survive here, not just as your wife, but as myself." He studied her face, the determination, the pride, the fear she was trying to hide, and slowly nodded. "All right, but if anyone tries to hurt you, then you can hurt them back. But let me fight my own verbal battles. Deal." Neediness. "Tell me something true," she whispered in the darkness. "Like what?" "Like why you really wrote that advertisement, the real reason." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, slowly, the words came. "I was lonely. So lonely I could barely stand it. Every night I'd sit on that porch and watch the sun go down and think about how I was going to die alone, unknown, unmourned. The ranch would go to some distant cousin who didn't care, and it would be like I'd never existed. Like all this work, all this effort was for nothing. Clara's hand found his in the darkness, lacing their fingers together. I wanted a wife, Luke continued, but more than that, I wanted a witness, someone to see my life, to share it, to remember it, someone to make it all mean something. And now? Now I have you, and you've already made it mean more than I imagined. He pulled her closer. What about you? What's the real reason you answered? Clara was quiet even longer than he'd been. I was drowning, she finally said. After my father died, the debts came like vultures. Men I'd never met showed up demanding payment, showing contracts I'd never seen. They looked at me and saw only an asset to be liquidated. I had three choices: marry one of my father's creditors, old men who wanted a young wife to show off, become a seamstress or governess and spend my life in service, or take a chance on the unknown. And you chose the unknown. I chose freedom, or at least the possibility of it. She pressed her face against his chest. I chose the chance to be something other than what everyone expected. Are you getting what you hoped for? I'm getting something better. I'm getting myself. Luke held her tighter, this woman who was turning out to be so much more than he'd bargained for. Outside, the Texas night sang its familiar song, coyotes calling, cattle lowing, wind whispering through the grass. Inside, two people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago lay entwined, building something that might one day be called love. They'd wanted different things. He'd wanted peace. She'd wanted freedom. What they were getting was each other, with all the complications and revelations that entailed. And somehow, improbably, that was starting to be enough. September arrived with no relief from the drought. The grass turned from brown to gray, crunching underfoot like old bones. The creek that ran through Luke's property dried to a trickle, then to scattered pools, then to nothing but cracked mud. Cattle clustered around the well, their ribs showing more each day, their eyes dull with thirst and hunger. Clara stood at the kitchen window one morning, watching dust devils dance across the yard, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd been at the ranch for 5 weeks now, and every day the land looked more desperate, more hungry. Luke tried to hide his worry, but she saw it in the tightness around his eyes, the way he'd pause sometimes while working and just stare at the horizon as if willing rain to appear. We need to make decisions, she said when Luke came in for breakfast. He looked at her, his face already dusty, though the sun was barely up. What kind of decisions? About the cattle, about water, about how we're going to survive if this drought doesn't break. Clara set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of him, smaller portions than she would have liked. Their supplies were running low too, and town was 8 miles away through increasingly harsh conditions. We can't keep pretending everything will be fine. Luke sat heavily, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. I know. So what do we do? What can we do? We can't make it rain. Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her own breakfast forgotten. No, but we can adapt. Santiago told me about the deeper water sources. We found 3 places where the ground stays darker, where roots go deeper. We should dig test wells there. Digging wells takes time and money we don't have. Then we sell some cattle. Reduce the herd to what we can sustain through the drought. Luke's jaw tightened. Those cattle are our future. Every head I sell is income we lose, breeding stock we can't replace. And every head that dies of thirst is a complete loss. Clara kept her voice gentle but firm. I've been watching them, Luke. We're going to start losing animals soon if we don't act. Better to sell healthy cattle at a fair price than to have dead ones worth nothing. You've been here 5 weeks and you're telling me how to run my ranch? The words came out harsher than he'd probably intended, but they landed like blows. Clara felt her face flush, anger and hurt warring in her chest. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're right. I've only been here 5 weeks. What could I possibly know? She turned toward the door. Enjoy your breakfast. Clara, wait. But she was already gone, striding across the yard toward the barn. She needed space, needed air, needed to be away from Luke's stubborn pride and her own wounded feelings. Santiago looked up from mucking stalls as she entered, concern crossing his weathered face. Senora, you are well? I'm fine. Clara grabbed a pitchfork. I'm going to help. This is not work for... Don't. Clara pointed the pitchfork at him, not threateningly but firmly. Don't tell me what work is or isn't for me. I'm tired of everyone deciding what I can and can't do. Santiago raised his hands in surrender, a slight smile tugging at his lips. As you wish, senora, but use the smaller fork. That one is too heavy. Clara wanted to argue but realized he was right. She traded for a lighter tool and set to work with furious energy, channeling her anger into the physical labor. The work was hot and dirty, and her back ached within minutes, but it felt good to do something, to move, to matter. She was so focused that she didn't hear Luke approach. His voice made her jump. You're right. Clara turned, pitchfork still in hand, and found her husband standing in the barn doorway, hat in his hands, looking miserable. About what? She asked warily. About the cattle, about the wells, about making decisions instead of just hoping. Luke stepped closer. And I'm sorry for what I said. You've earned the right to have opinions about this place. The anger drained out of Clara, leaving her just tired. I'm not trying to take over your ranch, Luke. I'm trying to help save it. I know, and that scares me. Why? Luke looked away, jaw working. Because if you're right, if we have to sell off the herd and dig new wells and change everything, then it means I failed. It means all these years of work weren't enough, that I'm not enough. Clara set down the pitchfork and closed the distance between them. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. Adapting isn't failing. Asking for help isn't weakness. And recognizing when something isn't working so you can fix it. That's not giving up. That's survival. Your father's words? My words? Hard-earned. She let her hands drop. My father died rather than admit he was wrong, rather than change course when his business started failing. His pride killed him as surely as any disease. I won't watch you do the same thing. Luke pulled her against him, holding tight. What did I do to deserve you? You wrote an honest letter, and you gave me a chance. Clara pulled back to look at him. So are we going to have this fight every time I have an opinion? Probably. At least you're honest. She managed a small smile. So what do we do? About the ranch? Luke sighed. We do what you said. We dig test wells, and we take 50 head to market next week. It'll hurt, but you're right. It's better than watching them die. 60 head. Clara, get 60, Luke. We need the cushion, and we need the money for well-digging equipment. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 60. But I choose which ones. Fair enough. They went back to the house together, the fight cleared, if not forgotten. Over the next few days, Luke and Santiago worked to separate out the cattle they'd sell. Older animals, those less suited for breeding, the ones that would bring decent money but wouldn't cripple the herd's future. Clara helped where she could, her riding improving enough that she could actually be useful in moving cattle. On the fourth day, as they were working a small group of cows into a temporary pen, one of them broke away and headed for open country. Luke spurred his horse after it, but Clara was closer. Without thinking, she kicked Duke into a gallop and went after the fleeing animal. The chase was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Clara had never ridden this fast, never felt this much power beneath her, this much risk. The cow dodged and weaved, but Clara stayed with it, remembering Luke's lessons about anticipating the animal's movements. When she finally got close enough, she swung her rope, the motion still clumsy but determined, and by some miracle, the loop settled around the cow's neck. The rope went taut. The cow pulled. Clara held on, her hands burning through her gloves, her entire body straining against the weight. Duke planted his feet, well trained enough to know his job, and together woman and horse brought the cow to a halt. Luke rode up, his face a mixture of terror and pride. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Clara was breathing hard, adrenaline singing through her veins. Which was it? Both. He leaned over and kissed her, hard and quick. Don't ever scare me like that again. Did I do it right? You did it perfectly. Santiago rode up last, grinning broadly. La señora is becoming a vaquera. Don't encourage her, Luke said, but he was smiling too. That night, Clara's body ached in new ways, her muscles protesting the hard riding and the strain of holding that rope. But as she lay in bed beside Luke, she felt a deep satisfaction she'd never experienced in Philadelphia. She'd done something real, something that mattered. She'd helped. I'm proud of you, Luke murmured in the darkness. Today? The way you rode. I was terrified. I know. That's what makes it brave. Clara turned to face him. Tell me it gets easier. Tell me I'll stop feeling like I'm one mistake away from disaster. I wish I could, but the truth is that's ranch life. You're always one drought, one harsh winter, one accident away from losing everything. You just learn to live with it. That's bleak. That's honest. Luke stroked her hair. But you also learn that you're stronger than you think, that you can survive things you thought would break you, and that having someone to face it with makes all the difference. Is that your way of saying you're glad I'm here? That's my way of saying I love you. The words hung in the darkness, simple and profound. Clara's breath caught. They'd been married 6 weeks, had shared a bed and meals and work and arguments, but this was the first time either of them had said it. You don't have to say it back, Luke added quickly. I know it's soon. I know we barely know each other really, but Clara kissed him, silencing his nervous rambling. When she pulled back, she kept her forehead pressed to his. I love you too. I think I have since you didn't send me back on the train when you realized I wasn't what you expected. You're so much more than I expected. They made love slowly, tenderly, with a new depth of feeling that transformed the act from physical release into something closer to communion. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on Luke's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt something she hadn't experienced since her father died. She felt like she belonged somewhere. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was hanging laundry, another skill she was gradually mastering, when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders emerged from the dust, 2 men and a woman. Luke came out of the barn, his posture instantly alert. Jack Thompson, he said as the lead rider dismounted. Didn't expect to see you. Jack Thompson was a big man, probably 50, with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. Heard you were culling your herd, came to see if we might work something out. What kind of something? Joint drive to Fort Worth. I've got 40 head to sell, you've got 60. Together we can split the costs and the work. Jack turned to look at Clara, who'd stopped pretending to work and was watching openly. You must be the new Mrs. Carter. Clara walked over, extending her hand. Clara Carter, pleased to meet you. Jack shook her hand with visible surprise, then smiled. Firm grip, I like that. He gestured to his companions. This is my foreman, Pete Rodriguez, and my daughter Abigail. Abigail Thompson dismounted with easy grace, a woman about Clara's age with sun-streaked hair and a face that spoke of long hours outdoors. She wore split skirts and a practical shirt, her boots dusty and well-worn. When she shook Clara's hand, her grip was indeed firm. Call me Abby, she said. We're neighbors. No need for formality. How far is your ranch? Clara asked. 4 miles north, the Diamond T. Papa's been running it for 20 years. 23, Jack corrected. And we've been through droughts before. This one's bad, but we'll survive. Luke and Jack fell into discussion about the cattle drive, while Abby drifted over to where Clara stood. The younger woman studied Clara with frank curiosity. So you're the mail-order bride everyone's talking about? Clara stiffened slightly. I suppose I am. Don't get prickly, I'm not judging. Abby's smile was genuine. Hell, I think it's brave. Coming out here to marry a stranger, learning a whole new life, that takes guts. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Abby looked around the ranch with an assessing eye. How are you managing, really? Clara considered lying, painting a rosy picture, but something about Abby's directness invited honesty. I'm learning. It's hard. Everything hurts, I mess up constantly, and I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. Sounds about right, Abby laughed. I grew up on a ranch, and I still mess up. Last week I left a gate open and spent 6 hours rounding up escaped cattle. Papa was furious. But you know what you're doing. You're not starting from nothing. True, but you've got something I didn't have. You chose this. I was born into it. There's power in choice. Abby glanced at Luke, then back to Clara. He treating you right? Yes, he's patient with me, more patient than I deserve sometimes. Good, because if he wasn't, you'd tell me and I'd kick his ass. Abby said it matter-of-factly, and Clara believed her. We women out here have to look after each other. There aren't enough of us to afford feuds or competition. Something warm bloomed in Clara's chest. I'd like that. Having a friend, I mean. Then you've got one. Abby linked her arm through Clara's.
Now, show me around. I want to see how you've set up your household. They spent an hour talking while the men negotiated. Abby was a revelation, confident and capable, moving between feminine and masculine roles with an ease Clara envied. She could discuss recipes and sewing one moment, cattle breeding and water rights the next. She didn't apologize for her knowledge or pretend to be less than she was. How do you do it? Clara asked finally. Balance everything? I don't balance, I just am. Abby shrugged. My mother died when I was 12. Papa needed help running the ranch, so I learned. Some people think it's strange, but it's just my life. I can shoot and rope and brand cattle, and I can also cook a decent meal and sew when I need to. Why should I have to choose? The women in town will talk no matter what you do, so you might as well do what serves you. Abby fixed Clara with a serious look. The worst thing you can do out here is try to be what everyone expects. There's too much work and too few hands for that kind of nonsense. Be yourself. Let them adjust. By the time the Thompsons left, with an agreement for a joint cattle drive in 2 weeks, Clara felt like she'd found an ally. Abby had invited her to visit the Diamond Tea, had promised to teach her some tricks for managing ranch life, had offered friendship without judgment or conditions. I like her, Clara told Luke that evening. Abby's good people. Jack raised her right after her mother passed. She doesn't seem to care what anyone thinks of her. She can't afford to. She'll inherit that ranch someday, needs to know how to run it. Luke looked at Clara thoughtfully. Is that what you want? To be more like her? I want to be competent, confident. I want to stop feeling like an imposter. You're not an imposter, Clara. You're just new. But Clara wasn't sure she agreed. Every day brought new challenges, new evidence of how much she didn't know. When she tried to preserve vegetables from the dying garden, she nearly poisoned them all by using the wrong proportions. When she attempted to make soap, it turned out caustic enough to burn skin. When she tried to help Santiago repair a saddle, she sewed the pieces together backward. Each failure chipped away at her confidence, made her question whether she'd ever truly belong here. And the drought kept getting worse, the land growing more desperate, the tension ratcheting higher each day that passed without rain. The night before the cattle drive, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay beside Luke, listening to his steady breathing, and felt anxiety coiling in her gut. Tomorrow he'd be gone for at least a week, maybe more, driving 60 head of cattle to Fort Worth with Jack Thompson's crew. She'd be left alone with Santiago to manage the ranch, to handle any problems that arose. You're thinking too loud, Luke murmured, startling her. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. He rolled over to face her. What's wrong? I'm scared. About you leaving. About being responsible for the ranch. Santiago will handle anything important. You just need to keep things running day to day. And if something goes wrong, then you figure it out, same as I would. Luke took her hand. I trust you, Clara. Do you trust yourself? Not really. Well, I trust you enough for both of us. He kissed her forehead. You're stronger than you think. You've proven that every day since you got here. Have I? You caught a runaway cow. You stood up to drunk cowboys. You told off half the women in town. Hell, you married me sight unseen and came to live in the middle of nowhere. Luke's voice was warm with affection. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. Clara wanted to believe him, but doubt still gnawed at her. What if I fail? What if something happens and I can't handle it? Then you'll learn from it, and we'll fix it together when I get back. Luke pulled her close. Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. We've got enough today. He was right, but that didn't make sleep come any easier. Clara lay awake long after Luke drifted off, staring at the ceiling, counting her inadequacies like other people counted sheep. Dawn came too quickly. Luke and Santiago left with the sun, driving 60 head of cattle north to meet Jack Thompson's crew. Clara stood in the yard and watched them disappear into the dust, feeling suddenly small and very alone. The ranch stretched around her, vast and demanding, and she was solely responsible for it now. The first 2 days passed without incident. Clara fed the remaining cattle, checked the water level in the well. Dropping steadily, she noted with worry, collected eggs, tended the chickens. She cooked simple meals, cleaned the house,
tried to keep herself busy so she wouldn't think about all the things that could go wrong. On the third day, she found a dead calf near the creek bed. The animal was gaunt, its eyes sunken, clearly a victim of the drought. Clara stared at the small body and felt tears prick her eyes. One more loss, one more piece of the ranch's future gone. She forced herself to deal with it practically, dragged the carcass away from the water source, did what needed to be done. But afterward, she sat on the porch and cried, releasing all the fear and frustration and grief she'd been holding back. She cried for the dead calf, for the dying land, for the impossibility of everything she was trying to do. When the tears finally stopped, Clara felt strangely better, lighter. She washed her face, straightened her spine, and went back to work. The ranch didn't care about her tears. The cattle still needed water. The chickens still needed feeding. Life went on. On the fifth day, she saw riders approaching and felt her heart leap. Maybe Luke was back early. But as they drew closer, she recognized the three cowboys from outside the saloon, the ones who'd insulted her, who'd fought with Luke. Clara's hand went to the pistol she now kept in her apron pocket. She stood on the porch and waited, her heart pounding, but her face calm. The cowboys stopped their horses a respectful distance away. The one Luke had punched, his jaw still showed bruising, dismounted slowly, hands visible and empty. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we don't mean any trouble." "Then what do you want?" "To apologize. For what we said that day. For how we acted." He looked genuinely ashamed. "We were drunk and stupid, and we said things no man should say to any woman. We're sorry." Clara studied them carefully, looking for signs of mockery or threat. She found only embarrassment and what seemed like genuine contrition. "Why now?" she asked. "Because Jack Thompson told us what you did, helping with the cattle, learning to ride and rope, working the ranch like you were born to it." The cowboy shifted his weight. "He said you're no bought woman. You're a rancher's wife, working just as hard as any man. And he said if we'd insulted his daughter Abby the way we insulted you, he'd have horsewhipped us." "Jack said that?" "Yes, ma'am." "And he's right. We were wrong, and we're sorry." Clara let the silence stretch, making them wait, making them feel the weight of their words. Finally, she nodded. "Apology accepted. But if I hear you talking about any woman that way again, you'll answer to me. Not my husband, me. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we're done here. Good day, gentlemen." They left quickly, clearly relieved. Clara watched them go, then went inside and sat down hard, her legs suddenly shaky. She'd handled it. She'd stood her ground, accepted their apology with dignity, and made her point clear. Luke would be proud. The thought made her smile despite her still racing heart. She'd done it herself. She'd fought her own battle just as she'd asked Luke to let her do. And she'd won. That night, Clara sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge, feeling something shift inside her. She wasn't the frightened city woman who'd stepped off the train 2 months ago. She wasn't the awkward bride who'd fumbled through her first week. She was becoming something else, something stronger, something forged by sun and dust and determination. She was becoming Clara Carter, rancher's wife, frontier woman, herself. Luke and Santiago returned 6 days after they'd left, dusty and tired but triumphant. The cattle had sold for a good price, enough to fund well digging and restock supplies and still have a cushion for emergencies. Luke swept Clara into his arms the moment he dismounted, holding her tight. "Missed you," he murmured into her hair. "Missed you too." Clara pulled back to look at him. "But I managed. The ranch is fine. I'm fine." Never doubted it, but the relief in his eyes said otherwise. Over dinner, Clara told him about the week, about the dead calf, about the cowboy's apology, about the 100 small tasks she'd handled on her own. Luke listened with growing pride and something else in his expression, something that looked like wonder. "What?" Clara asked finally. "Nothing, just, you did it. You survived without me. Was there ever any doubt?" "Maybe a little." Luke reached across the table to take her hand, but not anymore. That night, in bed, he made love to her with a fierce tenderness that left them both breathless. And when Clara fell asleep afterward, curled against his chest, she dreamed not of Philadelphia but of rain. Great sheets of it, soaking into the parched earth, bringing the land back to life. The dream felt like prophecy, like hope,
like the future they were building together, one hard day at a time.
The rain Clara had dreamed about didn't come. October arrived with the same relentless heat, the same cloudless skies, the same dust that coated everything and everyone. Luke and Santiago began digging the first test well in one of the locations Clara had identified, working from dawn until their backs screamed and their hands bled through their gloves. Clara brought them water, food, encouragement, and sometimes picked up a shovel herself despite their protests. "This is madness," Luke said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his face. They were 15 feet down and still hadn't hit water. "We could dig to China and find nothing." "Or we could dig 3 more feet and find everything," Clara countered. She stood at the edge of the hole, peering down. "The ground is darker here, damper. That means something. It means we're wasting time and energy. It means we're trying. That's not waste." Santiago, who'd been quiet throughout the exchange, suddenly called up from the bottom of the hole. "Agua! I feel moisture!" Luke was down the ladder in seconds. Clara heard him digging frantically, heard his sharp intake of breath, and then his whoop of triumph. "We've got seepage! Clara, you were right!" She wanted to climb down and see for herself, but settled for leaning over the edge and grinning like a fool. "I told you, the water's there. It just takes work to find it." They spent 2 more days deepening and widening the well, then another day installing a pump. When they finally hauled up the first bucket of clear, cold water, all 3 of them stood staring at it like it was liquid gold. Santiago crossed himself and murmured a prayer. Luke just kept touching the water as if it might disappear if he looked away. "One well won't save us," he said finally, "but it's a start." "Then we dig another," Clara said simply, "and another after that, until we have enough." Over the next 3 weeks, they found water in 2 of the 3 locations Clara had identified. The third was dry, a reminder that nothing was certain, but 2 new wells meant the cattle could be spread out more, reducing the strain on any single water source. It also meant that if the rains finally came, they'd be better positioned to capture and store that water. But the effort took its toll. Luke worked himself to exhaustion day after day, driving himself harder than he'd ever ask anyone else to work. Clara watched the weight fall off him, watched the lines deepen around his eyes, watched him push past exhaustion into something that looked dangerously close to collapse. "You need to rest," she told him one evening as he stumbled into the house, barely able to stand. "Can't. Too much to do." "Luke, you're going to kill yourself." "Better that than watch this ranch die." He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "Every morning I wake up wondering if this is the day we lose it all. Every night I go to sleep knowing I didn't do enough." Clara knelt in front of him, taking his scarred hands in hers. "Listen to me. You are doing enough, more than enough, but you can't save this place if you destroy yourself trying. What else am I supposed to do? Just accept that we might lose everything?" "No. Accept that you're human, that you have limits, that asking for help isn't the same as giving up." She squeezed his hands. "Let me carry more. Let Santiago carry more. Stop trying to bear this alone." Luke looked at her with eyes that held too much pain, too much fear. "I don't know how to do that. I've been alone so long, carrying everything myself. I don't know how to share the weight." "Then learn. Because that's what marriage is. Sharing the weight when it gets too heavy for one person." Something in Luke's expression cracked. He pulled Clara into his arms and held on like she was the only thing keeping him upright. Maybe she was. They sat like that for a long time, neither speaking, just holding each other while the darkness gathered outside. When they finally went to bed that night, Luke fell asleep almost instantly, his body demanding rest his mind had been denying. Clara lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her own shoulders. If Luke couldn't carry everything, she'd have to help. But that meant being more than competent. It meant being capable, trustworthy, strong enough to manage real problems. The test came sooner than she expected. 3 days later, Santiago rode in hard just after dawn, his horse lathered and his face grim. "Señora, we have trouble. The north fence, someone cut it. Cattle are out, scattered across Thompson land and beyond." Luke was already in town picking up supplies for the new wells. Clara felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to stay calm. How many are out?
Maybe 30, 40 head. Hard to tell. Deliberately cut? You're sure? See. Clean cuts with wire cutters. This was no accident. Clara's mind raced. Rustlers, maybe, or vandals, or someone with a grudge against Luke. It didn't matter who right now. What mattered was getting those cattle back before they were lost or stolen. Saddle Duke for me. I'm coming with you. Senora, perhaps we should wait for Senor Luke. By the time he gets back, those cattle could be miles away or already stolen. We go now. Clara was already moving, changing into her riding clothes, split skirts that scandalized the church ladies but were practical for ranch work. She grabbed her hat, checked that her pistol was loaded, and met Santiago in the yard 5 minutes later. They rode hard toward the north fence line. Clara's riding had improved dramatically over the past weeks, and she could now handle Duke at a gallop without fear of falling. The wind whipped her face, her heart pounded with adrenaline and fear, but she kept her seat and kept pace with Santiago. The fence was exactly as he'd described, 3 clean cuts in the wire, the posts still standing but useless. Cattle tracks led in multiple directions, some heading toward Thompson land, others toward open range. Clara dismounted and examined the cuts closely. Fresh, she said. Maybe last night, early this morning at latest. Someone who knows what they are doing, quick, quiet work. Clara straightened, scanning the horizon. We need help. Ride to Thompson's. Ask Jack and Abby if they've seen our cattle, if they can spare hands to help round them up. I'll start tracking the ones that went east. Santiago looked uncertain. You should not go alone, Senora. We don't have a choice. Every minute we wait, those cattle spread further. Clara swung back onto Duke. I'll be careful. I have my gun and I know this land now. Go, fast as you can. Santiago hesitated only a moment more, then nodded and spurred his horse toward the Diamond T. Clara turned Duke east and began following the cattle tracks, her eyes scanning for danger even as she tracked the scattered herd. She found the first group, 6 cows and a calf, grazing near a small depression about a mile from the cut fence. Working carefully, using the techniques Luke had taught her, she managed to turn them back toward home. They were stubborn, not wanting to leave the marginally better grass they'd found, but Clara was more stubborn. It took 20 minutes of patient work, but she finally got them moving in the right direction. She was heading back to look for more when she saw the riders. There were 4 of them, rough-looking men on equally rough horses, and they were herding a group of Luke's cattle. She recognized the brand even from a distance. Toward the southwest. Away from Luke's land. Away from anywhere the cattle should be going. Rustlers. Clara's blood went cold, then hot. Those were Luke's cattle. Her cattle. Months of work and sacrifice represented in those animals, and these men were just taking them. Her hand dropped to her pistol, but she forced herself to think. 4 men against 1 woman. Even armed, the odds weren't good. The smart thing would be to let them go, to ride back and report what she'd seen, to let the law handle it. But by then, the cattle would be gone. Sold or rebranded or slaughtered, and they'd never get them back. And Clara found she couldn't accept that. Wouldn't accept it. She kicked Duke into a gallop and rode straight at the rustlers, her heart in her throat but her spine straight. As she got close enough to be heard, she pulled her pistol and fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed across the prairie, and all 4 men whipped around to stare at her. Those cattle belong to the Carter Ranch, Clara called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Turn them back, now. The lead rustler, a big man with a scarred face and mean eyes, actually laughed. And what's a little girl like you going to do about it? I'm giving you 1 chance to do the right thing. That so? The man nudged his horse toward her, still grinning. You gonna shoot us, sweetheart? All 4 of us? If I have to. He laughed again, but his hand moved toward his own gun. Claire didn't hesitate. She fired, her shot taking his hat clean off his head. The laughter died immediately. Next one goes lower, Clara said, her pistol now aimed at his chest. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was ice. I said turn them back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Clara could see the calculation in the rustler's eyes. Was she serious? Was she actually dangerous? Was it worth the risk? His hand twitched toward his gun again. I wouldn't, said a new voice. Clara's heart leaped as she recognized Abby Thompson riding up fast, a rifle across her saddle.
Behind her came Santiago and 3 Thompson ranch hands, all armed. The odds had just shifted dramatically. The lead rustler's face darkened with anger, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. "This ain't over," he snarled at Clara. "Yes, it is," Abby said calmly, her rifle now pointed directly at him. "Because if I see you on Thompson land or Carter land again, I won't be as nice as Mrs. Carter. I'll shoot first and let the sheriff sort it out later." The rustlers exchanged glances, then slowly turned their horses and rode away, leaving Luke's cattle behind. Clara watched them go until they disappeared from sight. Then her entire body started shaking. The pistol nearly fell from her nerveless fingers. Abby was beside her in an instant, taking the gun, steadying her. "Easy. You're all right. It's over. I thought they were going to—" "But they didn't. You stood your ground and you won." Abby's voice was fierce with pride. "That was either the bravest or the craziest thing I've ever seen." Luke said the same thing once. He was right both times. Abby squeezed her shoulder. "Come on, let's get these cattle home." They spent the next 3 hours rounding up the scattered herd. With the Thompson hands helping, they found most of the missing cattle and got them back through the cut fence onto Carterland. Santiago stayed to begin repairs on the fence, while Clara and Abby rode back to the ranch house. Luke's wagon was in the yard when they arrived. He came out of the barn and froze when he saw Clara's face, saw the dust and the way she was still shaking slightly, saw Abby beside her like a protective guard. What happened? His voice was deadly quiet. Clara dismantled and told him everything: the cut fence, the scattered cattle, the rustlers, the standoff. She watched his face go through several expressions: fear, anger, pride, more anger. When she finished, he turned to Abby. "Thank you for getting there when you did. Thank Clara. She's the one who faced them down alone." Abby smiled. "Your wife's got more courage than sense, Luke Carter. You'd better appreciate that." "I do." Luke looked at Clara, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. "I also wish she wouldn't scare 10 years off my life." "Join the club," Clara said weakly. "I scared 15 off my own." After Abby left with promises to keep watch for the rustlers, Luke pulled Clara into the house. He checked her over like she might be injured, his hands gentle but thorough, looking for hurts she hadn't mentioned. When he was satisfied she was physically unharmed, he pulled her into his arms and just held her, his heart hammering against her ear. "Don't ever do that again," he said roughly. "Don't ever put yourself in danger like that. They were stealing our cattle. I don't care. Nothing we own is worth your life." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Yes, it is. This ranch is our future, our survival. I wasn't going to just let them take it. And if they'd shot you? If Abby hadn't arrived in time? What then?" "Then I would have tried to shoot them first." Clara met his eyes steadily. "Luke, I know you want to protect me, but I'm a rancher's wife. This is what that means. Protecting what's ours, taking risks when we have to, standing up to people who want to take advantage. You could have died. I could die falling off a horse, or getting kicked by a cow or catching fever. Life is risk, especially out here." She cupped his face in her hands. "I'm not going to hide and let you handle everything dangerous. We're partners. That means we face the danger together." Luke closed his eyes, his jaw working. I know you're right. But Clara, if something happened to you..." "Nothing happened. I'm fine. We got the cattle back. It's over." "Is it? Those rustlers, they'll come back. They'll try again." "Then we'll be ready." Clara's voice hardened. "And next time, I won't aim for the hat." Despite everything, Luke almost smiled. "My wild wife." "Your partner," Clara corrected. "Don't forget it." That night, Luke held her closer than usual, his body wrapped protectively around hers even in sleep. Clara lay awake, replaying the confrontation in her mind. She'd been terrified in the moment, but looking back she felt something else too, a fierce satisfaction. She'd protected what was theirs, she'd stood her ground, she'd proven herself capable of more than she'd ever imagined. The next morning brought news from town. The rustlers had been spotted trying to sell stolen cattle in Fort Worth and had been arrested. The sheriff sent word that he'd need statements from Clara and anyone else who'd witnessed the incident. Clara rode to town with Luke, and at the sheriff's office she gave her account clearly and calmly, not minimizing the danger, but not exaggerating it either. "You're lucky you didn't get killed," Sheriff Morrison said when she finished. He was an older man, grizzled and skeptical. "Woman's got no business confronting armed rustlers alone." "Woman had no choice," Claire replied coolly. "Those rustlers were stealing our livelihood. I did what needed doing." "Could have gotten yourself shot." "Could have. Didn't. Now are you going to prosecute these men or lecture me?" The sheriff blinked, clearly not used to being talked back to. Luke, standing behind Clara, made a choking sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "I'll prosecute them, Mrs. Carter. You don't need to worry about that." "Good. Then we're done here." As they left the sheriff's office, Luke took Clara's hand. "You know you just scandalized the whole town, right?" "I seem to do that a lot." "Yes, you do." He squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you. Even though I scared you? Especially because you scared me. Means you're doing things that matter." They stopped at the general store for supplies, and Clara found herself the center of attention. The story of the confrontation with the rustlers had already spread, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Some people were impressed. Others were scandalized. A few were outright hostile. Martha Henderson approached while Clara was examining fabric. "Mrs. Carter, I heard about your adventure." "Did you?" Clara kept her voice neutral, waiting to see which way this would go. "I wanted to say, well, it was very brave. Foolish, perhaps, but brave." Martha lowered her voice. "My own grandmother once faced down claim jumpers with nothing but a shotgun and determination. It's good to see that spirit isn't dead in modern women." The approval caught Clara off guard. "Thank you. However," Martha continued, "you should know that not everyone sees it that way. There's been talk about whether you're a proper influence, whether you're setting a bad example for younger women." "A bad example of what? Protecting my property? Standing up for myself?" "Of forgetting your place as a woman." Clara felt anger flash hot through her chest, but she controlled it. "Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, my place is wherever I choose to stand. If that makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine." Martha studied her for a long moment, then surprised Clara by smiling. "I think I'm starting to understand why Luke chose you. You've got spine." "Is that a compliment?" "Out here? It's the highest one." Over the next few weeks, Clara found herself an unwilling topic of conversation throughout the county. Some women approached her with curiosity, asking how she'd learned to shoot, whether she was afraid, what it felt like to face down dangerous men. Others avoided her entirely, as if courage might be contagious and they wanted no part of it. But a few, like Abby, like Martha Henderson, like the widow Morrison, began to look at her differently, with respect, with interest, with the beginning of something that might become solidarity. It came to a head at the Ladies' Auxiliary meeting in late October. Clara had been invited, more or less commanded to attend, and she went reluctantly, expecting judgment and censure. Instead, she found herself in a room full of women who wanted to learn. "Is it true you can shoot?" asked Sarah Chen, the seamstress's daughter. "Yes." "Could you teach us?" Clara looked around the room, seeing various expressions: fear, interest, defiance, hope. "Why would you want to learn?" "Because we're alone too much," Martha Henderson said quietly. "Our men work long hours, travel for cattle drives, go to town for supplies. We're left on ranches and homesteads by ourselves, and if trouble comes, we have no way to defend ourselves except to hide and hope." "My husband won't like it," another woman said nervously. "Then don't tell him," Abby suggested from her spot by the window. "Or tell him after you already know how. Let him argue with competence instead of possibility." The women looked at each other, a silent conversation happening in glances and nods. Finally, Martha spoke again. "Mrs. Carter, if you're willing to teach us, we'd like to learn. Not just shooting, but everything. How to manage when our men are gone, how to protect our homes, how to be more than just helpless dependents." Clara felt something shift in the room, something important. These women were asking her to help them claim power, to take control of their own safety and capability. It was a responsibility she'd never imagined, but one she found she wanted to accept. "All right," she said, "every Saturday afternoon. Bring your own weapons if you have them, and I'll teach you what I know. But understand, this won't be easy. You'll have sore shoulders and bruised hands, and people will talk about you. They already talk about us, Sarah Chen said dryly. Might as well give them something worth talking about. So began what would later be called, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with horror, the Clearwater Ladies Shooting Society. Every Saturday, weather permitting, a group of ranch wives and daughters gathered at the Carter Ranch for target practice and instruction. Clara taught them gun safety, marksmanship, maintenance. Abby taught them tracking and reading signs of danger. Martha Henderson, who had more authority in town than anyone realized, provided cover by officially calling it outdoor recreation and exercise. Luke watched the first session from the barn, his expression unreadable. When the women had left and Clara came to find him, she wasn't sure what she'd see in his face. You're starting a revolution, he said finally. I'm teaching women to protect themselves. Same thing. But he was smiling. My wild wife, making more wild women. Does it bother you? Luke thought about it seriously. A month ago, maybe. Today? Today, I think you're exactly what this county needs, what all of us need. A reminder that strength isn't about being invulnerable. It's about being willing to try. Clara kissed him, relief and love flooding through her. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being worth understanding. As October faded into November, the drought showed no signs of breaking, but something else had broken. The isolation that had made ranch life so difficult for women, the assumption that they had to be helpless, the silence that kept them separated and weak. Now they gathered, practiced, talked, shared knowledge and problems and solutions. And when rustlers tried to hit the Henderson Ranch 3 weeks later, they found themselves facing Martha Henderson with a rifle, her shot steady and her aim true. The rustlers fled without taking a single head of cattle. When word spread, the town's reaction was mixed. Some men were angry, feeling their authority undermined. Some were relieved, glad their wives could protect themselves. Some were simply baffled, unable to understand why women would want such skills. But Clara noticed something else. The women stood taller now, spoke with more confidence, made decisions instead of waiting for permission. And while not everyone approved, no one could deny that the ranch women of Clearwater County had changed. They'd become dangerous, in the best possible way. On the last day of November, Clara woke to find blood on her nightgown. For a moment, she thought she'd started her monthly cycle early, but the cramping felt different, sharper, more insistent. And then she remembered. She'd missed her cycle. Twice now. She'd suspected she might be pregnant, but hadn't said anything, hadn't wanted to worry Luke until she was certain. But now, feeling the unmistakable pain of her body rejecting what it had briefly held, she knew. She'd been pregnant. And now she wasn't. Clara made it to the outhouse before she started crying, great wrenching sobs that she couldn't control. She'd lost something she hadn't even known she wanted, hadn't realized how much she'd hoped for until that hope was gone. Luke found her there 20 minutes later, still crying, still bleeding. He didn't ask questions, just helped her back to the house, cleaned her up, tucked her into bed. And when she finally had breath to speak, to explain, he held her while she cried some more. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Why are you sorry? You didn't do anything wrong." "I lost it. I lost our baby." "Clara, love, you didn't lose anything on purpose. These things happen. The land is harsh. The conditions are hard. Your body was probably too stressed." "Then it's still my fault. I worked too hard, pushed too much." "Stop." Luke tilted her face up to look at him. "This is not your fault. Do you hear me? Not your fault." But Clara felt the guilt anyway, heavy and cold. She'd wanted to prove she was strong enough for this life, and maybe she'd pushed too hard. Maybe her body was telling her she wasn't ready. Maybe she wasn't enough. Luke seemed to read her thoughts. "You are enough, Clara. You're more than enough. And when the time is right, when the land softens and the rains come and life gets easier, we'll try again. But right now you need to rest and heal. Let me take care of you for a change." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, but she was too tired, too sad, too empty. So she let Luke care for her, bringing her food, changing the sheets, sitting with her when the cramping got bad. Santiago took over her chores without comment, and Abby came by with soup and understanding, having lost 2 pregnancies herself before her mother died. "It gets easier," Abby told her. "The grief, I mean. It never goes away completely, but it gets easier to carry. Does it stop feeling like failure? Eventually, you realize it's not about what you did or didn't do. It's just life. Cruel sometimes, but not personal. Abby squeezed Clara's hand. You'll try again, and maybe next time will be different. And if it's not, then you'll survive that too, because that's what we do out here. We survive what we have to, and we help each other through it. Clara spent 3 days in bed, letting her body heal, letting her heart catch up with her loss. On the 4th day, she got up, dressed, and went back to work. The cattle still needed water. The ranch still needed tending. Life went on, whether she was ready or not. But something had changed in her, a softness maybe that hadn't been there before. An understanding that strength wasn't just about pushing forward, it was also about knowing when to stop, when to rest, when to let yourself feel the pain instead of trying to outrun it. Luke noticed the change. You're different, he said one night. Bad different? Just different. Quieter, maybe. More, I don't know, more yourself? Clara thought about that. I think I've been trying so hard to be what I thought I should be, strong, capable, fearless, that I forgot it's okay to also be sad, or scared, or human. The land taught me I'm not invincible. None of us are. No, but we can be enough. Even with our limits, even with our losses, we can still be enough. Luke pulled her close. You've always been enough for me. I hope you know that. Clara rested her head on his shoulder and watched the fire burn low in the stove. Outside, the November wind howled across the prairie, dry and cold and relentless. Inside, 2 people who'd been strangers 4 months ago held each other against the dark, having learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth struggling alongside, worth failing with, worth trying again for. They'd lost their first child before it had even begun. But they still had each other. They still had the ranch. They still had hope. And sometimes, in this harsh land, hope was the most dangerous and necessary thing of all. December brought the first real cold, a sharp wind from the north that cut through clothes and chilled bones. The drought still held, but now it was a frozen drought, the ground hard as iron, the few remaining water sources icing over at night. Clara wrapped herself in every shawl she owned and kept the stove burning constantly, feeding it precious wood that Luke and Santiago had to haul from miles away. The Ladies' Shooting Society continued despite the cold, the women too determined to let weather stop them. They practiced with numb fingers and red noses, their breath pluming in the frigid air. Clara watched them improve week by week. Sarah Chen could now hit a target at 50 yards. Martha Henderson had stopped flinching when she fired. Even the youngest girls were learning proper gun safety and respect for the weapons they held. You've created something remarkable, Luke told Clara one evening as they prepared for bed, layering on extra blankets against the cold. These women, they're different now, stronger. They were always strong. I just gave them permission to show it. That's more than most people would do. Luke pulled her close, sharing body heat. You've changed this whole county, Clara. Whether people want to admit it or not. Some people hate me for it. Some people hate change, doesn't make it wrong. Clara pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and horses and wood smoke. Do you ever regret it? Choosing me instead of someone quieter, someone who wouldn't cause so much trouble? Every day, Luke said, and when Clara pulled back to stare at him, he was grinning. I regret that I didn't find you sooner, that I wasted so many years being alone when you were out there somewhere, waiting to turn my life upside down. You're ridiculous. I'm in love with you. Same thing. They made love slowly, carefully, Luke treating Clara like she might break even though 2 weeks had passed since her miscarriage. She appreciated his gentleness even as part of her wanted the fierce passion they'd shared before, wanted proof that she was still desirable, still whole. Afterward, she lay awake while Luke slept, one hand on her flat belly, wondering if they'd ever have a child or if this harsh land would take that from them too. The answer came 3 days before Christmas, announced by distant thunder that had everyone running outside to stare at the sky in disbelief. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, heavy and promising, the first real clouds Clara had seen since arriving in Texas 6 months ago. Is that, she started,
hardly daring to hope. "Rain," Luke finished, his voice awed. "That's rain coming." Santiago crossed himself and murmured prayers in Spanish. The cattle, sensing the change in the air, grew restless and vocal. Even the chickens seemed agitated, scratching and clucking with unusual energy. The first drops fell an hour later, fat and cold and precious. Clara stood in the yard with her face turned up to the sky, letting the rain wash over her, soaking her dress and hair. Luke stood beside her, equally drenched, equally jubilant. When the rain increased from a sprinkle to a downpour, they grabbed each other and danced, laughing like children. It rained for 3 days straight. Not a gentle rain, but a Texas storm, violent and thorough, flooding the dry creek beds and filling the wells to overflowing. The land drank it in desperately, and within days the first hints of green began to show through the brown. Life, returning. Hope, renewed. On Christmas Eve, the rain stopped and the sun emerged, turning the wet prairie into a carpet of diamonds. Clara stood on the porch and felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. They'd survived. The ranch had survived. They'd made it through the worst, and now the land was coming back to life. Luke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Merry Christmas, wife." "We don't have presents. We barely have food for a proper dinner." "We have each other. We have the ranch. We have rain." Luke turned her to face him. "We have everything that matters." Clara kissed him, tasting rain and gratitude and fierce love. "When I answered your advertisement, I thought I was running away from a bad situation. I didn't realize I was running toward the best thing that would ever happen to me." "The feeling's mutual." Luke touched her face gently. "You're nothing like I expected. You're everything I needed." They spent Christmas Day quietly, just the three of them, Luke, Clara, and Santiago, sharing a simple meal and swapping stories. Santiago told tales of his childhood in Mexico. Luke shared memories of Christmases before the war, and Clara described the elaborate society parties her father used to host, how hollow they'd seemed even then, all surface and no substance. "I don't miss it," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "The city, the society, any of it. This is real. This matters." "Even when it's hard?" Luke asked. "Especially then." The new year arrived with more rain, gentler this time but steady. January brought green shoots pushing through the soil, wildflowers preparing to bloom, a softness returning to the harsh landscape. The cattle fattened, the horses grew sleek, and the tension that had gripped every rancher in the county finally eased. Clara's body began to change too, in ways she recognized now. The tenderness in her breasts, the slight nausea in the mornings, the exhaustion that came from nowhere. She waited 2 months this time before saying anything, terrified of losing another pregnancy, of facing that grief again. But when she finally missed her third cycle and could no longer hide the changes, she told Luke one evening over dinner. "I think I'm pregnant again." Luke's fork clattered to his plate. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." "Then we're going to town tomorrow. You're seeing Doc Henderson." "Luke, I'm fine. I'm not taking chances, not this time." His voice was fierce with protectiveness. "You're seeing the doctor, and you're taking it easy, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can answer to me." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could keep working, keep teaching shooting, keep doing everything she'd been doing. But the fear in Luke's eyes stopped her. He'd lost the first pregnancy too, had grieved it even if differently, and he needed this reassurance as much as she did. Doc Henderson confirmed what Clara already knew. She was about 10 weeks pregnant, everything looked healthy, and if she took reasonable care, there was no reason she couldn't carry to term. Reasonable care, he stressed, not coddling. Ranch women worked right up until birth sometimes, and the work was good for them as long as they listened to their bodies. "No heavy lifting," he instructed. "No riding any horse that might throw you, but walking, light chores, normal activity, that's all fine. Your body knows what it's doing, Mrs. Carter. Trust it." The pregnancy announcement spread through Clearwater faster than the rain had spread across the prairie. Women approached Clara with advice, warnings, old wives' tales, and genuine concern. The shooting practice continued, but now others took over the more strenuous demonstrations, while Clara supervised and instructed from a chair that Abby insisted she use. "You're glowing," Abby said one Saturday afternoon, watching Clara direct Sarah Chen's aim.
Pregnancy suits you.
I feel enormous and ungainly. You're barely showing. Wait until month 8. Then you'll know enormous. Abby grinned. My mother said she felt like a barn by the end, and she was tiny. Clara touched her slightly rounded belly, still hardly visible under her loose clothing. I'm terrified something will go wrong again. I know, but you can't live in fear. You have to trust that this baby is stronger, that the timing is better, that everything will work out. Abby squeezed her shoulder. And if it doesn't, if the worst happens, we'll be here. All of us. You won't go through it alone. The support meant more than Clara could express. These women who'd been strangers 6 months ago had become something like family, loud, opinionated, fiercely protective family. They brought her food, helped with heavy chores, and never made her feel weak or incapable despite her pregnancy limitations. As spring advanced, the land transformed. Wildflowers bloomed in riotous profusion, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush and Mexican hats covering the prairie in waves of color. The cattle thrived on the new grass, and Luke began talking about buying back the breeding stock they'd sold, rebuilding the herd to where it had been before the drought. We'll name the baby Hope, if it's a girl, Clara said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Because of the rain, the ranch surviving, because that's what got us through, hope. Hope that things would get better. Hope that we were strong enough. Hope that this life we're building means something. Clara took Luke's hand and placed it on her belly, where the baby had just started to move. Feel that? Luke's eyes went wide. Is that your child? Saying hello. Luke kept his hand there, waiting, and when the baby kicked again, his face transformed with wonder and joy, and something close to awe. Hello, little one. We're waiting for you. Do you think we're ready? Clara asked. To be parents? Nobody's ever ready, but we'll figure it out together, same as we figured out everything else. May brought the first real heat, though nothing like the brutal drought temperatures. Clara's belly swelled, making simple tasks harder, and Luke hovered over her like a protective bear. She found it alternately touching and irritating. She understood his fear, shared it even, but she also needed to feel capable, needed to contribute. They compromised. Clara handled the lighter tasks, the cooking and garden planning and bookkeeping that Luke had always neglected. She still supervised the shooting practice, but no longer demonstrated. She rode occasionally on the gentlest horse, and only when Luke or Santiago were with her. It chafed these limitations, but she bore them because the alternative, losing this baby, was unthinkable. In early June, 3 riders approached the ranch at sunset. Clara was on the porch shelling peas, her belly now unmistakably large, when she recognized them. The rustlers from months ago, the ones she'd faced down, who'd been arrested and supposedly jailed. Her hand went to her pistol, but the weapon felt heavy and awkward with her pregnant belly in the way. She was about to call for Luke when the lead rustler, the one whose hat she'd shot off, dismounted and approached with his hands clearly visible and empty. Mrs. Carter? His voice was respectful, nothing like the mockery from before. I'm not here for trouble. Got something to say? Then we'll leave. Clara stood slowly, one hand on her belly, one near her gun. Say it then. We're leaving Texas, heading to California. But before we go, wanted to apologize proper-like, for what we tried to do, for what we said. We were wrong. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is half of what we would have got for your cattle. Figure we owe you that much. Clara stared at the envelope, making no move to take it. Why? Because we heard about you. About what you're doing with the women folk, teaching them to protect themselves. About you facing down danger even heavy with child, still standing your ground. The rustler looked genuinely ashamed. My mother was beaten to death by claim jumpers while my father was away. She had no way to fight back, no way to save herself. If she'd known what you're teaching these women... He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Clara understood. She took the envelope carefully. I accept your apology, and I'm sorry about your mother. Yeah, me too. The rustler mounted his horse. You're doing good work, Mrs. Carter. Don't let anyone tell you different. They rode away as the sun touched the horizon. Luke emerged from the barn where he'd been watching, ready to intervene if needed. What did they want? Clara handed him the envelope, her hands shaking slightly. Redemption, I think.
Inside was more money than they'd expected, along with a note that simply said, "For the baby, for hope." Luke read it twice, then pulled Clara close, careful of her belly. "You keep surprising me," he murmured. "I keep surprising myself." That night, as they lay in bed with Luke's hand on her belly and the baby kicking actively, Clara reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. She'd arrived in Texas as a desperate woman with limited options, hoping only to survive. Now she was teaching women to defend themselves, helping run a ranch that was finally thriving, carrying a child, and somehow, impossibly, happy. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, sensing her wakefulness. "That I'm nothing like the woman in that photograph you saw. The one who answered your advertisement." "No, you're not. You're better." "I'm wilder." "Same thing." Luke kissed her temple. "You know what you said to me that first night? About choosing freedom?" "I remember." "I think I'm finally understanding what you meant. Not freedom from responsibility or work or hardship, freedom to be yourself completely, without apology. That's what you found here." Luke's voice was soft with wonder. "And that's what you've given to everyone else too. Permission to be wild, to be strong, to be more than what's expected." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the pregnancy making her emotions run closer to the surface. "When you wrote that advertisement, you said you wanted quiet. I was an idiot. You wanted peace. I found something better." Luke turned her face toward him in the darkness. "I found you. And you've given me chaos and challenge and more life than I thought possible. I wouldn't trade that for 1,000 quiet years." "Not even when I'm difficult?" "Especially then. That's when you're most yourself." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, the baby moving between them. Outside, coyotes sang to the stars, and cattle lowed in the distance, and the prairie stretched vast and alive under the summer sky. July brought oppressive heat, but not the deadly drought heat of the previous year. The wells stayed full, the grass stayed green, and life continued its determined march forward. Clara grew huge, her belly stretching her dresses to their limits, her back aching and her feet swelling. She couldn't ride anymore, could barely walk long distances, but she kept the books balanced and the garden producing and the shooting practice organized. "You need to rest," Luke said for the 100th time. "I've been resting. I'm enormous and slow, and I can't do half of what I used to do. If I rest anymore, I'll go mad. The baby could come any time now. Doc Henderson said I've got at least 3 more weeks." 2 days later, on a scorching afternoon in late July, Clara's water broke while she was feeding the chickens. She stood there in shock for a moment, staring down at the wetness soaking her dress, and then the first contraction hit, a tightening across her belly that took her breath away. "Luke!" She tried to yell, but it came out as more of a gasp. "Luke!" He heard her anyway, came running from the barn with Santiago close behind. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. "Get Doc Henderson," Luke ordered Santiago. "Fast as you can." But the baby had other plans. The contractions came hard and fast, giving Clara barely any time to catch her breath between them. By the time they got her into the house and onto the bed, she was already bearing down, her body taking over with an instinct older than thought. "The doctor's not going to make it in time," Luke said, his face pale but his hands steady. "I've birthed plenty of calves and foals. Can't be that different, right?" "If you compare me to livestock right now, I'll shoot you," Clara managed between contractions. "Fair enough." Luke washed his hands, grabbed clean linens, and positioned himself to help. "All right, love. Tell me what you need." What Clara needed was for this to be over, for the pain to stop, for someone else to be going through this instead of her. But since none of that was available, she focused on the work, because that's what this was, the hardest work she'd ever done. She pushed when her body demanded it, breathed when she could, and tried not to break Luke's hand when the contractions peaked. Santiago returned with Abby instead of the doctor. Henderson had been called to a difficult birth at another ranch and couldn't come, but Abby had helped with plenty of births, both human and animal, and she took charge with calm efficiency. "You're doing great," Abby said, checking Clara's progress. "I can see the head, just a few more pushes." "I can't," Clara gasped. "I can't do it."
Yes, you can. You've done everything else impossible since you got here. This is just one more impossible thing. Abby gripped her hand. You're the woman who faced down rustlers, who learned to ride and rope and shoot in 6 months, who taught half the county's women to stand up for themselves. You can damn well birth this baby. Spurred by Abby's fierce belief, Clara gathered herself for one final push. The pain was blinding, overwhelming, more than she thought any body could endure. And then suddenly, it was over, the baby sliding free in a rush of fluid and blood, tiny and red and wailing. It's a girl, Luke said, his voice breaking. Clara, we have a daughter. Abby cleaned the baby quickly, cutting and tying the cord with practiced hands, then placed the squirming, crying infant on Clara's chest. Clara looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair plastered to the small skull, the miniature fingers curling and uncurling, and felt her entire world shift on its axis. Hello, Hope, she whispered. We've been waiting for you. Luke knelt beside the bed, one hand on Clara's shoulder, one finger carefully touching the baby's perfect tiny hand. Tears ran down his face, unchecked. She's beautiful. You're both beautiful. She's so small, Clara marveled. How can something so small contain an entire person? Magic, Abby said softly, cleaning up the afterbirth and checking to make sure Clara wasn't bleeding too much. The best kind of magic there is. Doc Henderson arrived an hour later to find everyone healthy. Clara exhausted but glowing. Hope nursing for the first time with determined sucking, Luke looking like he'd been given the keys to heaven. The doctor checked them both over, pronounced everything satisfactory, and left with instructions for Clara to rest for at least a week. A week, Clara said after he'd gone. That's impossible. There's too much to do. The ranch will survive without you for a week, Luke said firmly. Santiago and I can handle things. You focus on healing and feeding that baby. That's your only job now. Clara wanted to argue, but the truth was she was more tired than she'd ever been in her life. The adrenaline of birth was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made even keeping her eyes open feel like work. She fell asleep with Hope in her arms, Luke's hand resting protectively on them both. The news of Hope's birth spread quickly through Clearwater. Over the next few days, a steady stream of visitors brought food, baby clothes, blankets, and advice. The women of the shooting society came en masse, cooing over the baby and telling Clara she was a warrior and offering to help with anything she needed. You've built quite a community, Martha Henderson said, holding Hope with the practiced ease of a grandmother. These women love you. They'd do anything for you. And I'd do anything for them, Clara replied. That's what matters, isn't it? Not being alone. Having people who stand with you. That's everything. Martha handed Hope back carefully. This county is different now because of you, Clara. Better. More honest. Women aren't hiding anymore, aren't pretending to be helpless. That's your legacy. Clara looked down at her daughter's sleeping face and thought about the world she'd be growing up in. A world where women could shoot and ride and speak their minds. A world where strength wasn't apologized for or hidden. A world that was still harsh and demanding, but where at least half the population no longer had to face it unarmed and afraid. I just wanted to survive, Clara said quietly. I never meant to change anything. The best revolutions always start that way. As hope grew from days to weeks to months, the ranch settled into new rhythms. Clara learned to balance motherhood with ranch work, strapping Hope to her chest for lighter tasks, leaving her with Abby or one of the other women when heavier work called. Luke was a doting father, sneaking away from chores to hold his daughter, talking to her constantly even though she couldn't possibly understand. Santiago carved toys for Hope, sang to her in Spanish, and declared himself her unofficial abuelo. The entire ranch revolved around this tiny person, this new life that represented everything they'd fought for: survival, hope, the future taking form. By autumn, with Hope 4 months old and thriving, Clara stood on the porch one evening and looked out at the land she'd learned to love. The prairie was golden in the setting sun. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and somewhere behind her, Luke was making Hope laugh with silly faces while Santiago prepared dinner. A year ago, she'd stood on a train platform in Philadelphia, terrified and desperate, answering an advertisement from a stranger because she had no other options. She'd wanted escape, maybe, or just a place to hide until she figured out what came next.
Instead, she'd found herself. Not the self she'd been raised to be, quiet, proper, deferential, but the self she'd always been underneath, waiting for permission to emerge. Fierce, capable, unafraid to take up space in the world. Abby rode up as Clara was lost in thought, dismounting with her usual athletic grace. Deep thoughts? Just reflecting on how much has changed.
Any regrets? Abby came to stand beside her, both women looking out at the darkening prairie. Clara thought about it honestly. About the miscarriage, the drought, the confrontation with rustlers, the bone-aching work, the moments of doubt and fear and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. About all the ways this life had challenged and changed her. Not one, she said finally. You? About what? About teaching me to shoot, about supporting the Ladies' Society, about befriending the scandalous mail-order bride who refused to know her place. Abby laughed, loud and free. Hell no, you're the best thing that's happened to this county. You shook things up, made people think, gave women a reason to believe they could be more than what everyone expected. She bumped Clara's shoulder affectionately. You're my favorite kind of trouble. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one.
Behind them, Hope started crying, hungry again, as she was every few hours, and Luke called out that dinner was ready. The ordinary sounds of home, of family, of life, continuing its beautiful, difficult, utterly worthwhile march forward. Clara turned to go inside, but paused at the door, looking back one more time at the land that had tested her and shaped her and ultimately claimed her as its own. She thought about that advertisement Luke had written, about the quiet wife he'd wanted, about how badly she'd failed to be that person. And she smiled. Because somewhere along the way, between the drought and the rain, between loss and hope, between who she'd been and who she was becoming, Clara had learned the most important truth of all. The wild ones, the women who asked questions and challenged assumptions and refused to be tamed, weren't mistakes or problems to be fixed. They were exactly what the world needed, what this harsh, beautiful land needed, what the future needed. They were the ones who survived, who thrived, who changed everything simply by refusing to apologize for taking up space in it. Luke appeared in the doorway, Hope in his arms, his face lit with love and contentment. You coming? Yes, Clara said, taking her daughter from him and feeling the perfect weight of her, the solid proof that impossible things could happen if you were brave enough to try. I'm coming home. And as she stepped inside, leaving the wild prairie night to its coyotes and stars and endless possibilities, Clara thought about that joke they'd made on their wedding night, the one that had become their private truth. Cowboy wanted a quiet wife, got a wild one who rode him till dawn, and every dawn since. It was the best mistake either of them had ever made.